Okay, there we go. Well, thank you so much for being here. My name is Amanda Finley. I started COVID-19 Long Haulers discussion group, and I'm so tickled to have you back with us, Amy, for another mental health town hall on acceptance.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about you.
It's good to be back. Good to see you, Amanda, as
You
always.
too.
I'm Amy Stewart. I know some of you, I don't know all of you. I am a licensed clinical social worker and I live outside of Dallas and Plano, Texas. And I worked with COVID survivors for change for about 3 years, and I still pop in once in a while when I'm able to do so. But this is obviously a group that's near and dear to my heart. And as a person also living with chronic illness, I have rheumatoid arthritis. I don't know what you're experiencing per se, but there are some similarities, and so I feel like this is my crowd. So really happy when Amanda asks me to come and speak with you all about a topic of interest to you, and happy to answer questions. But I'm also going to, Amanda, at the
Yeah.
end, I'm going to send you some materials to
Oh,
share
great.
with
Thank you.
people.
Okay.
So
Fantastic.
I do have a presentation I'd like to share. Give me just a moment. So Amanda asked me to do a presentation. Hold on, I can't do two things at once.
Right. I hear you.
Here we go. On acceptance. And I thought what I would do is kind of broaden the category to acceptance and commitment therapy. The thing is, the acceptance part of this is it's something that you can use in its own self, but you can also look at acceptance and commitment therapy because it's effectively, we're talking about the same thing. If you haven't heard of it, it's something to consider in terms of working with a mental health clinician if you have that option, but you don't need to necessarily. I always like to start at what's probably obvious to you all, but why are we talking about acceptance in the first place? There are many, many issues that go along with COVID-19 and long haulers. Some of these things you can check off the boxes and go, yep, 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 yep. And some of them, quite frankly, you may not have really considered. You may be new in your journey. I know many of you have been living with long COVID for a long time. And so these issues are clearer to you. But I really like to kind of point these out. The first thing that I also think is extremely important and sometimes gets left out of consideration is the grief that goes along with chronic illness. We know that grief and prolonged grief disorder, typically we apply those terms to people who are bereaved and who have lost a loved one. And some of you, quite frankly, I know that people would come to group, they had long haulers and had lost a loved one or multiple loved ones. But there is a grief that happens with chronic illness. Many of you have lost jobs, relationships, you've lost your health, you've lost your ability to do things for yourself. So there is a grieving that happens. And I think the difference is with chronic illness, as new things come on board for you, it's like you're grieving all over again. So it's almost like this chronic cycle of grief. Prolonged grief disorder is a new diagnosis. It's a mental health disorder. It's in the DSM, which is the big book of diagnostic codes that mental health clinicians use when they're diagnosing. It doesn't apply to necessarily to chronic illness, but I think eventually they'll get there. But it addresses when people are dealing with a long-term prolonged grief process that doesn't ease over time. So some of you may be dealing with that. Obviously, there's chronic pain and other symptoms that go along with COVID-19 or long hauler. It can lead to long-term and life-changing symptoms. You might have chronic pain. I think most of you would probably say that you're dealing with fatigue, other debilitating things. You might have changes in your ability to be mobile. Amanda and I were talking about brain fog earlier. I think I have a little bit of it, so I apologize if I'm a little slow. So brain fog is definitely something, cognitive issues. The thing that's, I think, different about long COVID when you compare it to other types of disorders, immune disorders in particular, is that it's so symptom wide, and there are lists and lists of different symptoms and systems that long COVID impacts. So while there's many of you who can talk to one another and go, yeah, I have that too, I have that too, there are symptoms that you may have that are very different from others on the call. So that it just makes up a lot of and takes up a lot of different physical symptoms and or systems. Then there's mental health challenges that goes along with living with a chronic illness. I also think, or I know that in particular with autoimmune disorders or inflammatory disorders, that mental health is part of that. Anytime there's inflammation in the body, we can look at depression now, for example, and see that inflammation in the body can actually cause major depressive disorder. There's also anxiety. Anxiety can be linked to physical symptoms, i.e., if you're having trouble breathing, if you have cardiopulmonary issues, anxiety can come on board for that. You can have anxiety in general, dealing with all of the things that you're having to deal with. Post-traumatic stress. I know many of you were in the hospital when you got sick. Even if you weren't, living with something that is life-threatening, living through that can cause trauma. And if you have trauma, you then can develop a post-traumatic stress disorder. Doesn't mean that you have a full-blown disorder necessarily. You can have symptoms related to post-traumatic stress, things like hypervigilance, like you're always worried that you're going to get sick again, which makes sense because I know many of you have been sick multiple times. It could be that you're avoiding people, places, and things. And part of that gets conflated with isolation and taking precautions.
Right.
I'm talking more about the avoidance of people, places, and things because of your anxiety and your fear. It could be impacting your mood, i.e., we see depression along with PTSD. So there are a lot of different mental health issues that can come on board with this, including other stress-related symptoms. And then social isolation. I get that question. I think I even got a question that was related to social isolation. I've talked to a lot of people with long COVID, living with long COVID, who have said they've lost relationships, they've lost partners, they've lost friends, they've lost work and that their work group, their work colleagues, and there's just a feeling of isolation. Part of that could be that your symptoms make it difficult for you to interact and to play and to socialize. And it could be that you're isolating out of concern for you don't want to get sick again. It could be that being mobile is difficult for you. All of those things can play into social isolation. And we know how important being connected to other people is. If we feel isolated and we feel alone, it can contribute to those mental health challenges. And then there's those secondary losses. In grief, there's that primary loss that occurs. So in your case, the loss of health. But along with that comes that domino effect of losing jobs, finances can be difficult, disruption in your daily lives, your relationships change. So it's one thing after another, it kind of cascades. And I think that somebody brought that up in one of the questions that you had, is that it feels like there's kind of a consistent sense of loss that you all are trying to manage. So what can help with all of this? I don't want to minimize how hard some of these things are. I know that staying connected and doing things to take care of your overall well-being, including your mental health, can be tough when you're trying to just feel okay in the day. So that is a reality. But being aware of these things and really trying to, for example, on number one, be connected socially, and whatever that looks like for you, whether that be through a Facebook page, whether that be through text or calling people, whatever that looks like for you, trying to stay socially connected with folks is something that can help boost mood, help to alleviate some of those feelings of isolation. Being in support groups like COVID Connections, those kinds of things can help that feeling of isolation and really create a sense of community. I know that a lot of you probably really feel a sense of community through the Facebook groups that you're a part of, and that's huge. Learning coping and resilience skills. We're going to talk about acceptance, and that to me is both a coping and resilience skill. There are other skills that you can learn to manage the stress related to this, regulating your emotions. When we have experienced a trauma and when we're dealing with something like chronic illness that wears us out, makes us feel exhausted, managing our emotions can become more difficult. So we become emotionally dysregulated. So you might hear emotional dysregulation. And what that means very simply is we have a hard time managing our emotions. And they come at us unexpectedly. We might describe it as we can't get a hold of ourselves or we don't know why we feel this way. An example I'll give you. I have worked with survivors of drunk driving crashes, and a survivor said to me once that she was in the grocery store and all of a sudden she started crying and her cart was full and she said, I couldn't get a hold of myself. I had to leave and I had all my groceries there and I had to go home. And she said, when I got home, I reflected on what happened, and the music that she was listening to overhead, it was the favorite song of her son's. And in that moment, she couldn't make the connection, but later she was able to reflect. But that's what I mean. It's those really intense moments of high highs and low lows. Engaging in prevention when and where you can through self-care. And so making sure that you're making self-care a priority in your life. And that's going to look different for everyone. This first thing says exercise. Exercise can be really hard if you can't breathe. It can be really hard if you're having a hard time mobilizing. Really, and I should change this, it should be about movement. You know, move when you can, where you can, to keep your body moving. Eat well when you can, if you can, and rest. I think that rest or sleep is probably elusive for a lot of you, and that's unfortunately part of chronic pain and some of the other symptoms that you're dealing with. If you can choose just one of these things and little baby step it, that is engaging in prevention to the extent that you can. And then mental health treatment or psychotherapy, if you have access to therapists. I know that that's not always possible. If you can, I think that acceptance and commitment therapy, like we're talking about tonight, can be helpful. There's other types of therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, exposure therapy in particular is helpful with grief and anxiety and trauma. Dialectical behavioral therapy, also helpful with trauma. So, knowing what to ask and knowing what to look for in a therapist, seeing if they are trained or certified in these specific types of therapies can also add some credibility to that. And I'm a big proponent of interviewing your therapist. Most will talk to you for 15 minutes to see, hey, is this going to be a good match? If they don't, then you might want to move on anyway. But really looking around, it is hard when you have experienced trauma to tell your story over and over again to new people, and I get that. However, you really want to be with somebody longer term who you can connect with and feel that you can work with them for a while. You can, though, also learn a lot on your own. I know that you probably have through groups like this, through reading, through investigating online. There are free groups online like COVID Connection. So there are other ways to address some of your mental health issues, not quite therapy, but still very supportive and helpful. My computer, there we go. So the moment why we're here is to talk about acceptance or acceptance and commitment therapy. I do think that when people hear the word acceptance, there is one way of looking at that and saying, So acceptance is a place that is hard and fast. You know, there's a line in the sand, and that's where I'm at. And really, what this is talking about is looking at the situation in a radical way, in a committed way, and deciding how you're going to feel about it or think about it in those moments. It's very fluid. It's not a one and done kind of, I accept my situation. So I know that those were a couple of questions that I had. It's much more fluid and dynamic, and it's contextual and situational. So it differs based upon the day, the week, the month that you're having. It's really about saying, I'm going to look at and reflect on my thoughts and feelings, and I'm going to commit to behavior changes around that that align with my values. So this is what they would call a value-oriented therapy. One of the things that I'm going to share with Amanda is a value sheet that you all can look at. And they encourage people to find 3 values that really align with them that they're going to commit to. So any behavior change that they make to support thoughts and feelings, they have to align with your values. Otherwise, it won't work for you. So how does it work? It starts with the acceptance of difficult emotions. So our tendency really is to push difficult, painful, difficult emotions away. Part of that is a result of a defense mechanism. So it's not bad, but if we are avoiding all the time and we're not facing them, even in little bits, they can become overwhelming and crush us, really. So, acceptance of difficult emotions is about learning how to stop avoiding them, denying them, or resisting them, but learning how to face them and sit with them and be present with them. Because difficult situations and difficult emotions are a natural part of life. It's how we look at them and how we work through them that can be helpful to us in the long run. And it's not about taking everything on at once. It's really about what can I do today and in this moment. So it really emphasizes mindfulness practice and being present in the moment. So one of the things that is incorporated in ACT work is meditation or some type of mindfulness practice to help you get present and be fully engaged with the now. We have a tendency, all of us really, as people, to look backwards or look forwards. So we're always either looking backwards, and that's a lot of times where depression is coming from because we can't change the past, or we're looking forward and we're getting anxious because we don't know what to expect. Being present in this moment this is the only moment we have, is here and now. Cognitive diffusion is also combined with mindfulness practice to help us to view our thoughts and feelings as temporary. These don't represent who we are as people. They're not totally facts either. They are impressions that we have of what's happening to us. It doesn't define us. If we can identify core values and let them guide us through these difficult emotions and be committed to staying true to ourselves, then we can get to a place of acceptance. That's what this means. So it's a process, it's fluid, it's ongoing. And a couple of the different values that are considered in ACT work, compassion towards yourself and towards others, connection, staying connected to yourself and to others, feeling like you're contributing. And that, I understand, can be hard when you're not able to do things either in a workplace or for your kids or for other family members or for yourself. But it's still, what can I do? It's about considering the what can I do? And vitality. So what to expect if you were in ACT therapy, but you don't have to go to ACT therapy to kind of think about these things. It's about learning to listen to your self-talk. What are you saying to yourself? What's your internal dialogue? Are you criticizing yourself? Are you worrying a lot? Are you avoiding? Are you doing all of the above? So the first part is really getting to know yourself. Again, we try to take those painful emotions and push them away because they are painful and they're difficult. If we slowly start to consume them and recognize them and notice them, we have more power over them. Then we learn to kind of explore what worked for us in the past. Not everything that has worked for you by way of coping in the past is going to work for you today because you are living with chronic illness and you weren't before necessarily. Some of you I know have dealt with multiple illnesses. So this might have to be sort of refined, but there are definitely coping skills that you've used throughout your lifetime to manage difficult emotions and thoughts and see if those things can apply to today. See what works, throw out what doesn't, and really commit to a more optimistic approach. So being flexible, being accepting, using those value-driven mindset can help in all of this. So what are some actions you can take? One is if you have the capacity to go to therapy, find a therapist or a counselor who practices ACT. If you cannot, there are other activities you can engage in. One is practicing mindfulness meditation. You can find free guided meditations, recorded meditations on YouTube. There are websites for that. You can meditate on your own. You don't have to use a guide. I find guided meditation helpful for me. But if you want to do mindfulness meditation, you can learn how to do that on your own. And it's about carving out time in the morning, in the evening, where you are focused on the present moment. You're focused on your breath. You're focused on, you pay attention to your thoughts, but you don't hold on to them. You let them go. You see them and it's like ticker tape. They move out away. And the idea is that eventually you kind of create this muscle memory where you can drop into the moment and be present. That will help you observe your thoughts objectively. This is a big skill, and this takes time to step back and view your thoughts as separate from yourself so that you can have more objectivity on them. We can't be fully objective of our own thoughts. They are subjective, but if we can separate ourselves from them, we can say, am I catastrophizing? Or am I taking this personally? Or you can start to have some inquiry and explore that. And it may be that, no, you're not catastrophizing. It's really this bad. But it's important to be able to look at your thoughts more objectively. Keep a log of your body's reactions. So record, and I know that there's different apps that do this, but you can also just write it down in a journal. Record how your body's responding to different situations so that you can learn what is the most stressful thing to you. There are things that when I'm having a flare that other people are like, I don't know how you do that. And it literally doesn't bother me. And then there's things that really do bother me and I struggle with. And those are the things that I try to focus on. An example of that is I know a lot of people get bothered that they can't do a lot of housework when they're sick. They can't do all their cleaning, all their cooking. I'm okay with letting that stuff go. I acknowledge, look, this is just the way it is right now. The house looks like a mess. As long as I can do some semblance of cleaning, that's about as good as it's going to get, and I can let it go. But there's other things that I find really hard, like feeling like I'm contributing at work. Work is important to me. And so if I feel like I can't work the way I was, or I'm not contributing fully, my head's not there, that bothers me. So I have to step back and look at that and go through what's rational about that. What can I really own on that? What can I do differently to improve that situation, understanding that I'm sick? Identify your core values, write down 5 to 10 things. The worksheet that I'm sending you says 3. I think that's probably more realistic, but you can do 5 to 10. Things that are important to you, and refer back to them regularly to see, are my behaviors and my actions aligned with my core values? Am I being compassionate to myself and others in these moments? Am I beating myself up probably. And so if I value compassion in general, why can't I be compassionate to myself? So it's helping you work through those things. Then you set goals based upon these values, establishing concrete goals, like, and I would say baby steps for yourself that are in line with these core values. And then learning other coping skills to support this process. So breathing exercises, mindfulness, meditation, journaling, self-care, any of those things that you can put in your toolbox. I do want to mention toxic positivity. I'm sure that you've heard of this. It may be that people think, Susie Sunshine, there's a lot of different ways that this gets wrapped up. That's not what this is. This isn't about ignoring your feelings at all. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's about acknowledging that this is difficult, because we kind of ignore them when we're pushing them away. Toxic positivity, though, is the idea, and I know that you get this from other people in your life. I absolutely know it, that you should maintain, you should be positive all the time, feel lucky, and denying that you have negative emotions. You need to be happy. You need to get over it. I know that you're hearing those things. That's not what I'm saying here. The dangers of that are that you're going in the opposite direction. You're still denying your feelings, but for a different reason. And they never get processed, and they get thrown to the side. If you get people, like I know you do, just be positive, good vibes only, look on the bright side, everything happens for a reason. You've got to actually think, is hanging out with, now they may be family members too, and I know that's a different story. But thinking about the people in your life, and are they supportive, and can they be supportive of a process of you learning to be accepting and more accepting of your circumstances? When you're embracing authenticity, and that's something you can tell people, I choose to embrace myself and my feelings and my thoughts authentically. And sometimes that means they're not all great thoughts and feelings. I'm working through them. And practicing mindfulness and compassion again, those are ways to support you through this healing process. And you can let people know, I'm choosing to be self-compassionate in these moments. So at the end of the day, ACT is an action-oriented approach. It is rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy, which means you're attending to your thinking and the way you behave to help reset some of your feelings. It helps you to accept your emotions, address your thoughts, and commit to living according to your values. So that is what acceptance is. It's about looking at your day-to-day, how am I doing, and looking at them head on, and getting to reintegrate those emotions and processing them. All right.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Yes, and I know that I did answer. I think I answered a couple of the questions.
You did.
Yeah.
Just in the course of that.
Yep. So again, I will make sure Amanda gets the information, and if you have any other questions, let her know, and she knows where to find me.
Yeah, call me. But before we go, Amy and I talked about this earlier today. I want to share with you, it's called the Stockdale Paradox. And it's something that I read about some months back. And when I read it, I was like, oh my, that's what I've been doing. I'm doing that. That is me. But I wanted to share something that I wrote earlier this summer when I was still living in a tent in the woods and frankly miserable. Um, I'm often asked how I stay so optimistic. It's a blend of Buddhist philosophy of impermanence and the Stockdale paradox, a technique to navigate challenging and ambiguous times by combining the ability to confront the brutal facts of your current reality, even as you maintain unwavering faith that you will prevail in the end, no matter how distant that is. I will get out of this tent. It really, really sucks, but I will get out of this tent. James Stockdale was a pilot who was shot down over North Vietnam and taken prisoner. At the onset, he mentally prepared himself for at least 5 years of hell. It turned out to be 7. He was tortured repeatedly, as were many others, and he watched many of them die. He later told writer Jim Collins, I never lost faith in the end of the story. I never doubted not only that I would get out, but also that I would prevail in the end and turn the experience into the defining event of my life, which, in retrospect, I would not change. When asked who didn't make it, he replied, oh, that's easy, the optimists. They were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas. And Christmas would come and Christmas would go. And then they would say, we're going to be out by Easter. And Easter would come and Easter would go. And then Thanksgiving, and then it would be Christmas again. And they died of a broken heart. That sounds familiar. At the beginning of the pandemic, I bolstered myself with the same mantra. This won't be days or weeks or even months. I was fully prepared to be an indoor cat for as long as it took, whatever it was. I wrote papers about this very thing in college, far too lengthy papers, bless my professor for reading them and grading them, on Ebola in West Africa and HIV in Thailand. I worked with students from Hubei province, Wuhan, and I knew we were in for a long ride. I just assumed that I would be inside for that ride. When you're thinking about where you are with your own long COVID journey, don't think about what's gone. When my hometown of Joplin, Missouri was destroyed by a tornado in 2011, we quickly realized there's no such thing as rebuilding. It's just building in a new reality. And that's exactly what we have to do now, build new lives in a new reality with bodies that seem foreign and in a different world, or a world more exposed. It means letting go of things no longer meant for us and opening up to what is. It's hard and it's scary. Maybe that looks like not working or not driving. Maybe that looks like using a mobility aid or accepting help. But whatever it is, you're not alone in this. I guess if there is a bright side to this, it's power in numbers. You must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they might be. So throw out your timeline and even the word recovery, but hang on to the hope that you can make your new reality fulfilling in some way. I got out of the tent.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you, Amy.
Because
But
that's life, isn't it?
right? It really
Yeah.
is. It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much for being here with us again. We really appreciate you.
Yes. Thanks
And
for having me.
yeah, and if anybody
Take
would
care,
like,
everybody.
yeah, and if anybody wants any more information, just message me, okay? And I'll get it to you. Thanks so much, Amy.
Thank you.
Take care.